Today's tutorial is going to cover the Gesso Resist technique. I'm going to use white gesso, which you can find in any art supply store. And I'm going to use a magazine page, which is slick and will not hold ink very well without the gesso. Now, the purpose of gesso is usually to cover an artist's canvas with and make it ready for painting. But what I like to use it for is to prepare magazine pages for stamping. If you've ever stamped on glossy cardstock, then you know that sometimes your stamps slip around and you don't get a good clean image. Well, gesso can do for magazine pages what regular cardstock does for your stamps, and that just gives them a little something for the ink to grab onto. Now, one of the other advantages of using gesso is that it can make your print on your magazine page look a little bit more opaque than it does when it first comes out of the magazine. So you can kind of fade the background just a little bit by adding layers and layers of gesso to your magazine page. Now, I'm working with the first layer wet and putting another layer down on top of it, and I would continue to do this until I got the opacity that I wanted. I'm going to set this aside because I have one that's finished. Now, here's the magazine page that I covered with gesso, and you can see that it's no longer shiny and reflective, and the print is a little bit muted from the application of the gesso. I'm going to use my Versamark ink pad clear watermark ink, and I'm going to use this Stampin' Up! Medallion stamp, which is very popular. And I'm just going to cover this with clear Versamark ink. Then I'm going to position my stamp so that the image covers about half of my gessoed piece, just to get a good image of that nice medallion, including part of the center. And now I'm going to cover the stamped image with clear embossing powder. And just make sure that you cover each area of your stamped image with embossing powder. Now, gesso will make your magazine page curl a little bit, and that's fine because you'll be fixing it with adhesive. Now that I have it covered with embossing powder, I'm just going to heat emboss it until it's set. Now I'm going to sponge this image so that it shows up on my magazine page. And I'm going to use crushed curry for the center of the medallion, and you can see how that really pops the image out. I'm going to go ahead and work a lot of the crushed curry ink into here. And this is where the beauty of using a printed page kind of comes to light. Next, I will take Dusty Durango, which is kind of a darker orange, and I'm going to go around the edges of the medallion, kind of blend it into the curry. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover the rest of the magazine page with the Dusty Durango ink. Now, what's really neat that you can't see on camera is the way that the gesso absorbs this ink and keeps it from transferring once it's absorbed. So if you were working on a slick magazine page, you would lose as much ink as you rubbed into the pages, but here it just absorbs into that top layer of gesso, really gets grabbed, and makes a nice surface for you to stamp on. Now I'm going to add a greeting to my card, and I'm going to use Sincere Salutations, the Thanks So Much stamp, and just black ink. I'm using India ink here. And like I said, you don't have to worry about slipping now that you've covered your magazine page with gesso. I can just stamp it and it's done. Now, depending on how thin or thick your layer of gesso is, if this looks a little bit shiny still when you first stamp it, just let it dry for a second. the more gesso you have, the more matte your surface will be. So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to mount it to a piece of Designer Series paper. And this is where it doesn't matter that your magazine page has curled a little bit, because once you put adhesive on it and put it down on your mat, all of your sins are forgiven. And now I'm going to pierce some holes for some accenting brads down the side. And I'm going to use my little template, my piercing template, and I'm going to line it up. What I do is I take the lines around the edge and just line them up with the corner of my cardstock, and then I know it's straight. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to use this piercing tool and I'm going to pierce one hole, and then I'm going to skip 3 and I'm going to do another one, skip 3 more and do another one. Now I'm using these larger vanilla brads and I'm just going to stick them in the hole. And the spacing of 3 holes on the template gives me enough room for the larger tops to be evenly spaced. And as a finishing step, I always like to hammer my brads flat with my craft hammer. This just makes it easier for me to adhere my cardstock to the front of my card. So that's all there is to finishing your card. Is I'm going to add it to a piece of craft cardstock, and now you can see that you can see the printed words through the embossed medallion, and the Gesso Resist has let the ink stick to it, and this is just a beautiful, simple technique.
And you saw the world in a darker shade.